Kinnah Yud Beis, Hali Asher Ta'avta, like many other kinos, has a very definite structure. Each stanza starts a Hali Asher, my tent, that. The Mekonain, the one reciting to the Kinnah, says to God, my tent, presumably referring to the Beis Hamikdash, that something positive. For example, in the first stanza, Ahali Asher Ta'avta, my tent which you desired. In the second stanza, Ahali Asher Komamta, my tent which you established, and so on and so forth. The second line is negative. Lama lenetzach, something bad. Why forever has something terrible happened to the Makom HaMikdash? So again, for example, in the first stanza, Lama lenetzach shudad v'yocho didim. Why is it forever plundered by the hand of the plunderers? In the second stanza, Lama lenetzach sumas biyad tzarim. Why is it forever slashed to pieces by the tormentors? The Beis Hamikdash is now destroyed. Destruction is now apparent. The second half of the second line of each stanza starts v'nihyesa. You, God, have become something negative. For example, again, in the first stanza, v'nihyesa kiro'eh be'otiyah, you will become like a shepherd with a lost flock. In the third stanza, v'nihyesa kitzonei v'tzitzar, you have become like a enemy and a tormentor. Finally, each stanza ends with a pasuk ending with the word po. Again, in the first stanza, V'ata mali po, and now, what are you doing here? In the second stanza, Mali yedidi po, what is my friend doing here? We can ask a couple of questions simply on the first word of the Kinnah, Ahali, my tent. Presumably, Bnei Yisrael are talking to Hashem and saying, my tent, meaning the Beis Hamikdash, which you had desired, is now destroyed. Why, all of a sudden, is the Beis Hamikdash called my tent? Isn't the Beis Hamikdash referred to as God's place, God's house? Ki veisi beis tefillah yikareh l'chol ha'amim? Does not God say, because my house is a house of prayer for all nations? Why, all of a sudden, has the Beis Hamikdash become ours, rather than God's? Furthermore, why is the Beis Hamikdash called a tent at all? The Gemara in Pesachim tells us that Avraham referred to the Makom HaMikdash, the place where the Beis Hamikdash was to be built, as a Har HaMoriah, Mount Moriah. Yitzchak called it a Sadeh, Veitzeh Yitzchak l'suach b'Sadeh. Yitzchak went out to daven in the fields. And Yaakov called it a bayis, right? Yaakov called it a house. Why all of a sudden is the Beis Hamikdash referred to as a tent? To begin to answer these questions and to get further understanding into the structure of the Kinnah, we can look at the very last line. The very last line says, V'ad ata, and until now, quote, Echa ya'iv be'apo. Quoting the first pasuk in the second chapter of Echa, the Mekonain says, Echa ya'iv be'apo. How has the Lord covered the daughter of Zion with darkness? Right? Echa ya'iv be'apo Hashem espas Zion. How could you have clouded, how can you have darkened the daughter of Zion? Continuing in the pasuk, Hishlich mishamayim eretz, you have thrown down from heaven to earth, Tif Eretz Yisrael, the glory of Israel. V'lo zachar hadom raglah b'yom apo, and you have not remembered your footstool on the day of your anger. We see a number of things from this pasuk. First of all, we see the rhyming structure. Echa ya'iv be'apo. Every stanza has to end with po. Number two, we see, as it were, a transformation of God. God has become the one who would throw down Tif Eretz Yisrael, the glory of Israel, from heavens to earth. If we continue in the parak, we see Ilah Hashem v'lo chamal. Hashem has swallowed up and has not shown mercy. Darach kashto ke'oyev. He has pulled back his bow like an enemy. And so we understand then the part of Nihyesa, that God has become, as it were, something negative, something against Israel. Furthermore, this pasuk allows us to understand why the Beis Hamikdash is called our Beis Hamikdash. Tiferes Yisrael, as referred to in the first pasuk of the second chapter of Echa, is referring to the Beis Hamikdash, just like it says in Yeshayahu, in Perek Samach Daled. Yeshayahu tells us, Beis Kadshenu v'Sifartenu, Asher Hilulucha Avosenu, our Beis Hamikdash, our holy place, and our Tiferes, our glory, asher hilucha avosenu, the place where our forefathers praised you, hayalis reifas eish, has been burnt by fire. So we see that sometimes the Beis Hamikdash is referred to as ours. It's Tiferes Yisrael, it's Tifartenu, it's Miktashenu, when the Beis Hamikdash is destroyed. And perhaps that can shed light on why we start with Ohel, why here the Beis Hamikdash is referred to as a tent as opposed to a house. Ohel, if we were to think more broadly, we would associate with the Mishkan, Ohel Moed, the tabernacle in the desert, which went from place to place with Bnei Yisrael. The Beis Hamikdash is immovable. It stays in one place, on Har Zion, in Jerusalem. However, the Beis Hamikdash is now destroyed. The Jews are dispersed into exile. They would like to take the Beis Hamikdash with them. They would like to bring the Kedusha into exile. Is that possible? Can they do so? This theme of movability and portability is emphasized by the ending of each stanza with the word po. The Beis Hamikdash is no longer po. It is no longer here. It is something we would like to take with us. It no longer can stand in Jerusalem. In place of the Beis Hamikdash being po, we have lam lanetzach. Why is it that now we have something negative? We have the shodidim. We have those who are tormentors. We have the plunderers. Coming again from the pasuk in Echa towards the end, lam lanetzach tishkachenu. How have you, God, forgotten us forever? The reversal of roles, God becoming, as it were, an enemy, God, as it were, becoming a tormentor, is manifest throughout the Kinnah. We can see this in let's take a look at the first two stanzas. The first stanza tells us, V'nihyesa k'ro'eh be'otia, v'ra'ashta v'raganta, v'ata malipo. You have become like a shepherd that has lost its flock, as you stormed and grumbled, and now what have I here? Let's look at each word separately. V'nihyesa k'ro'eh be'otia. What is this referring to, ro'eh be'otia? A shepherd who is, otia is literally veiled, but a shepherd who is veiled in mourning over the loss of the flock. This comes from a pasuk in Shir Shirim. The Ra'aya, the girl in Shir Shirim, says to the guy in Shir Shirim, the dode, Shalama ahia ka'otia al edrei chavirecha. Why should I be veiled? Why should I be in mourning amongst the flocks of your friends? Here, however, in place of Bnei Yisrael, in place of the girl of Shir Shirim, who is a mourning shepherd, we have God as the mourning shepherd. As it were, Bnei Yisrael in mourning has been replaced by God in mourning. Going further, V'ra'ashta v'raganta, you have stormed and you have grumbled. That word, V'raganta, shows up by Tisha B'Av itself, the first Tisha B'Av, the night that the spies returned to Bnei Yisrael with their negative report about the land of Israel. V'tiragnu v'ahaleihem, they, Bnei Yisrael, grumbled in their tents. Here, however, it is God who is grumbling, not Bnei Yisrael who are grumbling. Finally, the stanza ends, V'atam malifo. This comes from pasuk in Yeshayahu. In Perek Nun Beis, pasuk Daled, Yeshayahu says, Ki cho amar Hashem Elokim, for so says Hashem the Lord, Mitzrayim yamad amiva rishana lagorsham. Initially, my people went to live in Mitzrayim, in Egypt, and for no reason caused them troubles. And so Hashem says, what am I doing here? Why are we still in Galus? Why are we still in exile? Why are the Jews dispersed amongst the nations? The nations have nothing over the Jews. The nations have no power over them. The nations have no taina, have no claim on them. It's time to leave. It's time to go back to Eretz Yisrael. This is a nevuah of Nechama. It's a prophecy of comfort to Bnei Yisrael, but not in the Kinnah. In the Kinnah, the same words are used, V'atam alifo. What am I doing here? Hashem, as it were, says, what am I doing here in the ruins of a temple, in a Jerusalem that has been destroyed? Moving to the second stanza, again we see this reversal of roles, this change from good to bad, from bad to good. Looking at the end of the stanza, V'nihyesa, and you, God, have become, Kitzipor boded al gag martzareach, like a lonely bird on a rooftop screeching bitterly, Mal yedidi fo. What is my friend doing here? The Tzipor Boded Al Gag comes from a Perek Tehillim, Tfilah La'ani Ki Ya'atov, a prayer to one who is afflicted when he is faint. There, the person in prayer refers to himself and all the troubles that has overcome him as a Tzipor Boded Al Gag, like a lonely bird on a roof. Here, however, it is not the one praying to God who is the lonely bird, but it is God himself, who, as it were, has become the lonely bird. And he calls out, Mali Didi Fo, what is my friend doing here? This pasuk comes from Yirmiyahu. In Yirmiyahu, in Perek Yud Aleph, chapter 11, pasuk Yudaled, in the 14th pasuk, we see, Be'ata al tisbalal be'ada amazeh. God tells Yirmiyahu, God tells the prophet, don't pray for this people, they have sinned. Don't raise for them any happy prayers or requests. And then the psukim go on and say, what is my friend doing in this house? After having done all of these terrible actions. This is a negative pasuk. God, as it were, looks at the people who have sinned and says, what right do they have to be in the Mikdash? What right do they have to be in such a holy place, given the negative actions that they have done? Here, however, in the Kinnah, now we are crying, Bnei Israel are crying out, what is Hashem, our Yedid, our friend, doing here? Again, amongst the ruins of the Beis Mikdash, amongst the plunderers and the tormentors. The Beis Mikdash is destroyed. Nothing is left. How can God still be here? On Tisha B'Av, and perhaps only on Tisha B'Av, we can express our grief in ways that are almost blasphemous. God becomes an enemy. God becomes our tormentor. We can look at God and say he is alone. We can look at God and say that he's in mourning. This demonstrates the grief and the pity and sorrow we must feel on this day, on the day of Tisha B'Av. And even this is only possible because at the end of the Kinnah, at the second to last line of the Kinnah, says, Refuasi b'tucha ki rega v'yapau. My healing is guaranteed because it's only a moment of his anger. We know that at the end of the day, at the end of time, God will heal our wounds. God will redeem us. But for now, God's anger is upon us. Bas Tzion, the daughter of Zion, is darkened and is clouded.